Hi, everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. You're looking at the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, and I finally decided to make this video. I want to explore the possibility of this being the temple at the time that Christ comes. And before you completely dismiss it, first what we're going to do is go over the different things to consider. And then at the end of the video, we're going to go over some quotes by church leaders that seem to indicate that this is not the case, that this wouldn't be the temple. But I want to argue a little bit for the possibility, just because there's some really interesting things to consider. It may be that when those statements were made by different church leaders, it may just simply have not been revealed yet that this is the temple. And therefore, the logical assumption is that, nope, it hasn't been built. But maybe at some point it'll be revealed, yes, this is it. It needs to be renovated. It needs to be, there's changes that need to take place, but yes, this is it. So again, before you dismiss it, the whole reason why this even came to mind is this. We were going over this vision. This is a vision that Heber C. Hale, president of the Boise Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, had when he was in the spirit world. He had a lot of experiences there. I did a video about this recently. This is on BYU's website. And he says something pretty peculiar at this point of his vision or his experience in the spirit world. While standing at a certain vantage point, I beheld a wonderfully beautiful temple, capped with golden domes, from which emerged a small group of men dressed in white robes. It turns out that one of them was Christ, but he describes this this temple in the spirit world that has golden domes. And that immediately made me think about the Dome of the Rock. Now, we're going to go through basically the history of the Dome of the Rock. We're also going to go through symbolism when it comes to the architecture of the Dome of the Rock. And I think that you're going to be, I don't know, maybe not impressed, but maybe so. Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. One more thing to consider before I jump into this, and I bring this up pretty frequently on the channel, is the natural fulfillment of prophecy. Because sometimes I think we have these ideas that everything's going to be so obvious and that Christ can't come until you know that a prophecy has been fulfilled. Like, that has to happen first before Christ can come. And I'm not so sure that that's the case. Not that prophecies won't be fulfilled, but you may not know that they've been fulfilled. Let me elaborate with these quotes. The first one is from George Q. Cannon. He was a member of the first presidency. He says, and his entire talk, by the way, is about this idea. So I'm just going to pick out a few parts. We are apt to entertain views which are not very correct and which may be the result of our traditions and preconceived ideas. This is a peculiarity that pertains to mankind generally, that whenever they deal with the things of God or speak about them or contemplate them, and especially when they read the predictions made by the servants of God concerning future events or events that may transpire right before their eyes, they are apt to get sometimes erroneous ideas, or at least exaggerated ideas in relation to them. Later on in the talk, even with this experience in the past, the Latter-day Saints themselves are not entirely divested of extravagant views respecting the effects which are likely to follow the fulfillment of predictions yet in the future. Are we not all inclined to look forward to many events which have been predicted by the servants of God as being of so great and wonderful, and may I say so supernatural a character, that when they shall be fulfilled, they will even startle us who believe they are coming, and will compel the unbelieving inhabitants of the earth to accept them as evidences of the truth? Later on, but my experience has taught me that the Lord works in the midst of this people by natural means, and that the greatest events that have been spoken of by the holy prophets will come along so naturally as the consequence of certain causes that, unless our eyes are enlightened by the Spirit of God and the Spirit of revelation rests us, we will fail to see that these are the events predicted by the holy prophets. This is backed up by another statement by Joseph Fielding Smith in General Conference, April 1966. He says, "The words of the prophets are rapidly being fulfilled, but it is done on such natural principles that most of us fail to see it." So that's all I need to say about that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we only have a certain amount of revelation, and based on that revelation, it seems that this could not be the case. But why can't the Lord at any moment talk to President Nelson or the next prophet, if there is one, before the second coming, and tell them, okay, this is the plan. The temple has actually been there this whole time. It was built by Muslims, some of which were Jews who had converted to Islam. And now's the time. It's going to be renovated. It's going to be changed, but this is the structure. Okay, so let's get into it. So first, I want to talk about symbolism of domes, because this will set the stage as we talk about the Dome of the Rock. The symbolic meaning of the dome has developed over millennia. Although the precise origins are unknown, a mortuary tradition of domes existed across the ancient world, as well as a symbolic association with the sky. Both of these traditions may have a common root in the use of the domed hut, a shape which was associated with the heavens and translated into tombs. The mortuary tradition has been expressed in domed mausolea, martyria, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, and baptistries. The celestial symbolism was adopted by rulers in the Middle East to emphasize their divine legitimacy and was inherited by later civilizations down to the present day as a general symbol of governmental authority. So that's interesting to consider, because when Christ comes, he's going to come from a celestial realm. I realize that when they say celestial here, they're just referring to, the heavens, but celestial. He's going to come from a celestial realm. He's going to be here on earth. He's going to rule not only in an ecclesiastical way, but also in a political way. He's going to be the literal king of the world. And we can see this symbol. I'm sure it's already come to your mind as I read this. We can see this symbol in various places, including the Capitol building of the United States, which is a dome. On the inside of the dome, you have a depiction. This is called, where'd it go? Here. The Apotheosis of George Washington. And you have this scene of the heavens. And, there's kind of like this heavenly vision. I'm not going to go into all the symbolism here. I realize some of the issues here. But, you have this in the nation's capital. In Utah, the Utah State Capitol is essentially patterned after the United States Capitol building. It also has a dome on the inside. It doesn't have people or the apotheosis of anybody, but you have this image of the skies, of heaven, essentially. We also see it with the Catholic Church at the Vatican. This is St. Peter's Basilica, and it's a dome. And there's many other places that you can point to. So there's a rich tradition of places of power, places of government, using the dome architecture to emphasize that point. And it seems symbolically speaking. Okay. Sorry, let's continue. Celestial tradition. Smith writes that in the process of transforming the hut shape from its original pliable materials into more difficult stone construction, the dome had also become associated with celestial and cosmic significance, as evident from the decorations such as stars and celestial chariots on the ceilings of dome tombs. This cosmological thinking was not limited to dome ceilings, being part of a symbolic association between any house, tomb, or sanctuary in the universe as a whole, but it popularized the use of the domical shape. Michael Melarano writes that the nomadic tribes of Central Asia are the origin of a symbolic tradition of round dome tents being associated with the sky in heavens that eventually spread to the Middle East and the Mediterranean. Rudolf Whitcoer writes that a, quote, cosmic interpretation of the dome remained common well into the 18th century, end quote. So who knows how accurate any of that is? It doesn't really matter. The fact of the the fact of the matter is that you have a tradition of domes being associated with the heavens, and it's been around for a long time. Okay, it's something that people recognize. When Christ comes, maybe it would be a very fitting symbol to have the temple of New Jerusalem have a dome, and a golden one at that. Very impressive. Okay, very powerful symbol. But let's continue. Divine ruler. Now we're going to talk about shapes. Circle, octagon, square. Because if we go to Google Earth, we go to the Temple Mount, there's the Dome of the Rock. And you'll know, excuse me, and you'll notice that from the top it's an octagon. There's 8 sides. You have this circle in the middle. But we're about to talk about the symbolism of those shapes. Sorry. Herbert Howe writes that throughout the Middle East, domes were symbolic of, quote, the tent of the ruler, and especially of the God who dwells in the tent of the heavens, end quote. Passages in the Old Testament and intertestamental literature documents this, such as, and then he gives a list of scriptures. I just picked out a couple. Let's read those really quick. And it's interesting because we actually, this one right here, Psalm 19, verses 4 and 5. We recently talked about this when I did my solstice video. In that video, I was talking about the possibility that the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, or sometime around winter solstice, may be a time that would be selected for the second coming, because there's this symbolism of going all the way down to the darkest day, and the death of the sun, so to speak. And then the rebirth of the sun, the resurrection, light starting to come to the world because the days become longer, just that kind of idea. We read this scripture. I'm going to read verses 4 and 5. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun. So that's the scripture that the Wikipedia article cites. And then the next verse is interesting because it says, which is a bridegroom, talking about the sun being a bridegroom. So if you missed that solstice video, this is a very interesting thing, thinking about the sun being a bridegroom, as pointed out here in Psalm 19. So, we already associate the sun, S-O-N, with the sun, S-U-N. And just here's another thing. So it's interesting to think about the sun as the bridegroom, especially when we think about winter solstice. But anyway, that may not be right. We'll just have to see. So, which is a bridegroom coming out of his chamber and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. All right. Okay, so domes and tent canopies were also associated with the heavens in ancient Persia and the Hellenistic Roman world. What's interesting about that is when we think about the organization of the church, it's compared to a tent. And you have the different stakes of Zion, with the center stake being the actual city of New Jerusalem. So we have that kind of imagery that fits very well with our LDS conception of the stakes of Zion, which are the stakes of a tent that covers the world, right? A dome over a square base reflected the geometric symbolism of those shapes. The circle represented perfection, eternity, and the heavens. The square representing the earth. An octagon was intermediate between the two. And you have this depiction right here. You see? If you're trying to find like a meeting point of the two, like some shape that would represent a circle combined with a square. Well, an octagon does a pretty good job of that. Of course, you could use like other polygons, but here you have an octagon. So again, you look at the Dome of the Rock, and this is a really good symbol of heaven coming down to earth, Christ coming down to this world, being united, right? We think about the marriage between the bridegroom and the bride being the church, heaven coming down and assuming the reign of government, the literal reign of government of the world. It's a really good symbol. This right here, this is a really good symbol, the Dome of the Rock. All right, let's continue. Okay, so a dome over a square base reflected the geometric symbolism of those shapes. The circle represented perfection, eternity in the heavens. The square represented the earth. An octagon was intermediate between the two. According to Michael Walter, a tradition of the quote-unquote golden dome, identifying the ruler with the cosmos, sun, and astrological values, originated in Persia and spread to later Roman and Turkic courts. Persian kings used domed tents in their official audiences to symbolize their divinity, and this practice was adopted by Alexander the Great. So, you guys, here we're talking about these different empires that were symbolized in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream as a statue with different types of material built, making up the statue. And then Daniel's vision of the four beasts. And, so if you have this like tradition among these great empires, and then it being incorporated into the millennial era, that would make sense because Christ is taking over what once was ruled by these different world powers. And we have a very interesting case of this already. I've gone over this before. We have this new church symbol that was introduced April 2020. And this is a really neat article by Brian Collier or Collier. The new church logo, a designer's perspective and analysis. Again, no offense to him, but it should be referred to as a symbol because logo has the connotation of commerce, and that's not what this is. It's supposed to be referred to as a symbol, but that's okay. Okay, he says, my professor Adrian shared the following with our class about the creation of that logo update. He told us that he proposed that the church commission a professional typographer to create a proprietary typeface. They agreed, and they commissioned none other than John Heffler. Heffler was hired and proposed a design which he called Deseret, based on his own research. With modifications to the font, it was released for public purchase under the name Requiem. Here's a little look into the inspiration for the Deseret typeface, now used in the new church logo. A lot of inspiration came from the Trajan typeface. Here's a comparison. Here you can see the two right here. The Trajan font was originally inspired by this column in Rome. Quote, it is a triumphal column in Rome, Italy, that commemorates Roman Emperor Trajan's victory in the Dacian Wars. End quote. Wikipedia. So this column right here representing victory, it's a Roman column. And then the author says, isn't that fitting? Isn't that fitting? The font that the official name of Jesus Christ is set in is derived from the Roman Empire that crucified him. And it's no accident that the victory in war column is derived from symbolizes the victory Christ has in the war against evil. So at the very least, we have this, we have this in the official church symbol. You can see it in our meeting houses. Was there any sort of revelation that your local ward house is supposed to look like, other Christian churches? No, that's not a uniquely LDS thing. It's just something that was derived from the greater Christian world. So you can see this idea of things from outside of the church being incorporated into the church. So again, we look at the Dome of the Rock, we look at the symbolism of it, its location, all these different things. It would make sense to me that this could happen. You may say, well, this wasn't built to be a temple. Well, that's true, but neither was the Provo City Center temple. Before it was turned into a temple, it was a tabernacle. Okay, a tabernacle. And same thing with, the same thing with the Vernal, Utah temple. It was not originally a temple. And I want to say that this was probably a tabernacle too. But we don't have an example, I don't think, in the history of the world of a building from another religion being turned into one of our own. But I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. I really don't. Okay, but let's continue with the symbolism. Okay, according to Smith, the distinct symbolism of the heavenly or cosmic tent, stemming from the royal audience tents of Achaemenid and Indian rulers, was adopted by Roman rulers in imitation of Alexander, becoming the imperial baldachin. Whatever. This probably began with Nero, whose Domus Aurea, meaning golden house, also made the dome a feature of Roman palace architecture. One way the Romans depicted the celestial tent in architecture was a corrugated or gored dome. Michel Milaragno writes that the allegory of Alexander the Great's domical tent or domus. I'm getting frustrated with all these different words. Don't bother. I don't care. I don't care how they're pronounced. I don't care. Feel free to put it in the comments. I don't care though. Domical tent in Roman imperial architecture coincided with the divinification of Roman emperors and served as a symbol of this. According to Nicholas Temple, Nero's octagonal domed room in his Domus Aurea was an early example of an imperial reception hall, the symbolism of which, quote, signaled an elevation of the status of the emperor as living deity. So again, you have these false gods throughout time, emperors of these particular empires, no less, being seen as gods, using the dome to kind of underscore that, to emphasize that. And we're going to have the real thing when Christ comes. He is going to be an actual God, and he will be an actual king of the earth. So it's very fitting. You have these imposters, and then Christ is going to do the real thing when he comes at the second coming. So, which in this case of Nero related specifically to his incarnation as Helios in the Persian Mithra. The semi-domed apse became a symbol of Roman imperial authority under Domitian, and depicts into the Byzantine period used overhead domes or semi-domes to identify emperors. So there you go. And another thing, domes used to identify emperors. Karl Swoboda writes that even by the time of the Diocletian, the dome probably symbolized sovereignty over the whole world. Man, this is so fitting. This kind of symbolism is fitting for Christ, to identify emperors, to identify the status of the emperor as a living God, to symbolize sovereignty over the whole world. This is perfect. Roman imperial reception halls or throne rooms were often domed with circular or octagonal plans, and according to Nicholas Temple, quote, functioned as a ceremonial space between the emperor, his court, and the gods. That's a pretty fitting description for a temple, especially when Christ is literally, physically in that temple, and in one of these capital city temples like Jerusalem. Functioned as a ceremonial space between the emperor, Jesus Christ, his court, the church, and the gods, those that are resurrected and more, the presence of God the Father and beyond. Becoming a common feature of imperial palaces from the time of Constantine onwards. So circle, square, combining, octagon, it's all very fitting. Baptistries. In Italy, in the 4th century, baptistries began to be built like domed mausolea in Martyria, which spread in the 5th century. Smith writes that this reinforced the theological emphasis on baptism as a re-experience of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Krautheimer writes that, quote, baptism is the death of the old Adam and the resurrection of the new man. 8 is the symbolic number of regeneration, salvation, and resurrection as the world started the 8th day after the creation began, and Christ rose from the dead on the 8th day of the Passion. And that makes sense. We've talked about 8 before. Excuse me. We've talked about 8 before. And it's my understanding. I'm not sure if you can find it anywhere in church literature. Maybe you can. If you know, put it in the comments below, like copy and paste it. But it seems to me that that's why the age of baptism is at 8 years old, because, or at least one of the reasons, because it's symbolic in nature. You come to this world, you're born, you go through, your first 7 years. And then at that point, you're growing up, your age of innocence is complete, and then you fall. Or you get baptized. You have need for baptism at that point. Does it make sense? So it makes sense to me. And I think that this is actually right. You have the creation, 7 periods of creation. And then after that, you have the fall and the necessity of baptism. And it's the start of a new cycle. If you go in sets of 7, 8 would be the beginning of a new cycle. And we've associated this with potentially the millennium, how we're coming to a close. It's been 6,000 years, but we're coming to a close. So 7. And it seems that's why you see the number 7 so many times in the book of Revelation, because it's God completing this portion of the work that's been going on for 6,000 years. And so therefore, moving into the 7th 1,000 years, 8 would be appropriate, because now we're going into a new phase. We've talked about that in conjunction with President Nelson being the 17th president of the church, which is 7 plus 10, both of which in Judaism are considered numbers of perfection and completion. 10 in the mathematical sense, 7 in the sense of creation. So symbolically speaking, it would make sense if he was the last president of the church before the second coming. Okay, so anyway, let's continue. Excuse me, throne halls. Michel, whatever, Malaragno writes that the concept of Christ the King was the Christian counterpoint to the Roman tradition of emperor deification, and so absorbed the dome symbolism associated with it. Okay, so now we're starting to associate it with Christ the King. E. Baldwin Smith writes that, quote, in the West during the Carolingian period, the churchmen and rulers revived or took over the Byzantine East, the use of cupolas as a mark of royal and divine presence, end quote. Like the throne room of the Eastern Roman Emperor, or Chrysotriclinos, Charlemagne's throne in the Palatine capital at Aachen was located in a domed octagonal space. That's just like the Dome of the Rock, a domed octagonal space. In the words of Alan George Doig, the throne of Aachen was located in, quote, an intermediary place between between earth and heaven, end quote. On the gallery level, directly across from an image of Christ's throne on the dome. Wyndham Classen writes that the dome space symbolized the dual secular and divine nature of the restored empire. That also perfectly describes what we're about to have. We're going to have the secular, or in other words, the non-religious political kingdom of God, which of course will be based on Christ and his laws, but it's not going to be strictly, it's going to be political. That's all I'm going to say. So you have the political kingdom, and then the ecclesiastical kingdom as well. And you're going to have this complete restoration. Let's read that again. Wyndham Classen writes that the domed space symbolized the dual secular and divine nature of the restored empire. It's perfect. According to Herbert Schutz, the symbolism of the octagon at Aachen related to the emperor's role as God's representative on earth in achieving a universal imperium Christianum, and the geometry of objects and architecture acted as a wordless text to suggest ideas such as the Renovatio Imperii. Middle Ages. Excuse me. Literary evidence exists that the idea of the cosmic temple had been applied to the Christian basilica by the end of the 4th century, in the form of a speech by Eusebius on a church in Tyre. However, it is only in the mid-6th century that the earliest literary evidence of a cosmological interpretation of a domed church building exists, in a hymn composed by the Cathedral Church of Edessa. Kathleen E. McVeigh traces this to a blending by Jacob of Serou of the two major but contradictory schools of biblical exegesis at the time. The building as microcosm tradition of the Antioch school, combined with the Alexandrian view of the cosmos and firmament as composed of spheres and hemispheres. So just like the temple, it's like a microcosm of the macrocosm. It's like a mini universe. That's what it is. It's like a mini universe. You have it in the temple. You go through these different degrees, right? And after this life and through the eternities, there's 3 different degrees, and there's like so much more. Okay. Gold was used as the color of heaven, right? And that's pretty obvious. I think a lot of cultures view gold that way. So it's perfect that we have that here with the Dome of the Rock. And Charles Stewart notes that the emphasis on light from windows beneath the domes of Justinian's imperial commissions corresponds to the Neoplatonist idea of light as a symbol of wisdom. Andres Piotrowski writes that Byzantine churches after Justinian's Hagia Sophia often had gold-covered domes with a ring of windows, and that gold, as, quote, the most precious metal and the paradigm of purity, was a sign of light and divinity. In the writings of St. Basil and Pseudo Dionysius, it does not rust, decompose, or wear, and can be beaten into the fineness of the air. Gold was used to invoke the transcendental nature of the incarnate Christ. Just a couple more things, it looks like. Sorry, I know there's a lot. Renaissance. According to James Mitchell, in the Renaissance, the dome began to be a symbol throughout Europe as the unity of religion. And that's what we're going to have at some point during the millennium. Don't know how long it's going to take, but at some point, everyone will become converted to the true church, and there will be a complete unity of religion. Nathaniel Curtis writes that the large domes of the Renaissance implied, quote, ideas of power, dominance, or centralization as the capital of a nation or of a state. So again, we have this tradition today, the capital of a nation, and Jerusalem is going to be a capital city. Why not? Maybe that's what's going to happen. Maybe the Lord's going to reveal it's already been built. It was built by those whom I chose, some of which were Jews that were converted to Islam, or Christians who were formerly Jews or whatever. And now it just needs to be renovated and it needs to be dedicated. Who knows? Early modern legislatures. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip that part. We've pretty much already touched on that. Now, I want to go to the article about Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is an Islamic shrine at the center of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound on the Temple Mount in the Old City of Jerusalem. It is the world's largest surviving work of Islamic architecture, the earliest archaeologically attested religious structure to be built by a Muslim ruler, and its inscriptions contain the earliest epigraphic proclamations of Islam and of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Its initial construction was undertaken by the Umayyad Caliphate on the orders of Abd al-Malik during the second Fitna in 691 to 692 AD. And it has since been situated on top of the site of the Second Jewish Temple, built in 516 BC to replace the destroyed Solomon's Temple and rebuilt by Herod the Great, which was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. The original dome collapsed in 1015 and was rebuilt in 1022 to 1023. Now, I want to pause right here really quick. It really could be that if the Temple of Jerusalem, it could be that the Temple of Jerusalem is supposed to be reconstructed. It's supposed to look like the second temple, or it's supposed to look like, it's supposed to be built according to Ezekiel's vision of the third temple. Maybe that's how it's going to be. Maybe it's going to be right here on the Temple Mount, and the Dome of the Rock will be destroyed or removed. I don't know. But I don't know if that's the way that the Lord would deal with this. Okay. Our church is a church of peace, kindness, working with others, respecting others' beliefs. And I feel like this would be a very contentious thing. We're still going to have Muslims we're still going to have Muslims in the millennium, right? Now, I don't know what their what their attitude is going to be toward Christ when he comes. They do have a belief that Jesus is going to return again. They don't believe that he's the Savior or that he's divine, but simply a prophet, but they do believe he's going to come again. So if he came and then he took the Dome of the Rock and renovated it, maybe they would be okay with it. But if he were to remove it or destroy it, again, maybe they would be okay with it. But I just don't know if it would be the Lord's style to, wipe this off the map, or to, trash it and then build something else. Now, it could be, I don't know, maybe the great earthquake will destroy it. In which case, we've talked about the BYU Jerusalem Center. I still believe that it could be turned into a temple. I really do. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Maybe that will be the temple. Maybe the great earthquake will, destroy this, and then a new temple will be built. There's a lot of different possibilities. But all the craftsmanship and the aesthetics of this building, I don't know if the Lord would trash it. If it was turned into a temple, certainly there would have to be some changes, like the verses from the Quran that are in it. I would imagine they'd have to be changed. So I don't know. There's just a lot of things to think about, but I don't know if the Lord would do something like that to that building. Maybe he would. I don't know. Its architecture and mosaics were patterned after nearby Byzantine churches and palaces. Now, for me, this is where it starts to get even more interesting, because this was patterned after Christian churches, not Islamic, whatever, like other mosques. Patterned after Christian churches and palaces. Although its outside appearance was significantly changed during the Ottoman period and again in the modern period, notably with the addition of the gold-plated roof in 1959 to 1961 and again in 1993. Now, I don't know if that's something that you knew. I actually did not. That the gold on top, it hasn't been there since the beginning. This is a recent addition. 1959 to 1961. And I have a picture here. This is on X. This is what it used to look like. Did you know that? Put it in the comments below if you knew that, or if you didn't know that. I did not know that. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem as it looked in 1950. At the time, the dome was covered in blackened lead. Between 1959 to 1962, the lead was replaced by aluminum bronze plates covered with gold leaf. So that's kind of interesting. If we look at this as a possibility that this could be the temple of the millennium of Jerusalem, then it's interesting that it would have this renovation in how it would be refreshed, and in such a dramatic way. And in a very symbolic way, after having just talked about gold and the heavens and domes and what they represent, this would be a really good preparation for that time. It really would. All right, let's go back. The octagonal plan of the structure may have been influenced by the Byzantine era church of the seat of Mary. And I have that pulled up. Oh yeah, here's the Hagia Sophia, by the way. I think I meant to show that earlier, but here's another example of a very important building that had a dome. But anyway, the church that was just referred to is this. You can see it has the octagon, right? The octagon shape. It's not there anymore, but the octagonal plan of the structure may have been influenced by the Byzantine era church of the seat of Mary, which was built between 451 and 458 on the road between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. The foundation stone, or noble rock, that the temple was built over bears significance in the Abrahamic religions as the place where God created the world, as well as the first human, Adam, which of course that's not our theology, but it is also believed to be the site where Abraham attempted to sacrifice his son, and as the place where God's divine presence is manifested more than in any other place, toward which Jews turn during prayer. The site's great significance for Muslims derives from traditions connecting it to the creation of the world and the belief that the night journey of Muhammad began from the rock at the center of the structure. Okay, architecture. The structure is basically octagonal. It is capped at its center by a dome approximately 20 meters or 66 feet in diameter, mounted on an elevated circular drum standing on 16 supports, 4 tiers, and 12 columns. Surrounding this circle is an octagonal arcade of 24 piers and columns. The octagonal arcade in the inner circular drum creates an inner ambulatorium that encircles the holy rock. So you can see that here in this cross section. Here's like the inside, and you see the excuse me, the circular arcade that's on the inside that encircles the rock. I think there's another picture of it down here. Yeah, let's look at this. So here's the inside. You can see this arcade that goes around. And this is interesting to note. We, earlier on in the channel, a couple years ago, I did this whole thing about arcades because, so you have this arcade. Okay, so pay attention to this. So you have the arcade on the inside, also on the outside. There's kind of a, there's an arcade on the outside. You can see it here. On each side, there's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And that's interesting because I noticed that this might be a thing for these world capital temples. The reason why I say that is because we have the Independence, Missouri Visitor Center of the church, right? It's across the street from the Community of Christ's auditorium is what they call it. Interestingly, it has a dome. Maybe it'll be repurposed during the millennium. Across the street, you have the Community of Christ's Spiral Temple. And then over in this direction, this is the site of the first temple that would have been built as part of the 24 temple complex. Well, that's owned by a tiny little church called the Church of Christ Temple Lot. So we don't own it, but we do have this. And you'll notice it has this peculiar arcade feature. This building was built to be part of the 24 temple complex. I'm sorry for the repetition. I've done this a million times over, but there's always new people that subscribe. And where do I get that information? I get it from here. This is the Interpreter Foundation's article called The Past and Future of the Temple Lot in Independence, Jackson County, Missouri. Let me read it to you. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Visitor Center. The property purchased by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1904 remained undeveloped until 1968. After 2 different attempts over the years by the City of Independence / Board of Education to purchase the property from the church, concerned about the reality of eminent domain by the City of Independence, which means that's where a city or a government can take your land by force if they deem it necessary to build like a road or some important, structure. So the church was worried about that happening. So the church made an announcement in December 1967 for the present visitor center. Plans were quickly developed and formally approved on April 1968. A groundbreaking ceremony was held the following August. Interestingly, in the development of those plans in early 1967 by church architect Emil Fetzer, and with input directly from Alvin R. Dyer, which he was a member of the first presidency, by the way, Alvin R. Dyer, and approval by President David O. McKay, the awareness of the Joseph Smith-inspired, expanded 24-temple complex prepared in early 1833 was definitely taken into consideration. Okay, I should have pulled this up, and I'll do it right now. Joseph Smith Papers. Go here. City Plat Revised. So there was an original plan. Excuse me. There was an original plan for the city of Zion, and then they revised it, and this is what it was supposed to look like with 24 temples. Okay, 24 temples with this orientation, and this would be the principal temple, number 11, which would be. They have names for these temples. If you go to this it's on the original, the plat before this revision. Anyway, the point is, This was supposed to be the first temple built. This is the lot that's owned by the Church of Christ temple lot. But it would seem that we have this area down here, in that the Independence Visitor Center will either be number 13 or number 16. Okay, but let me continue with what we were reading. So on March 10th, 1967, a meeting of Dyer and Fetzer was held with McKay in his Hotel Utah apartment office. Dyer recorded the highlights of this session in his diary. Quote, "We reported to the president that our study in this direction was to undertake, if we could, to ascertain which of the temple buildings designated would presumably be located on that part of the temple land that the church owned. This we had arrived at and would be concentrated upon for the erection of a building for the purpose intended, the basic structure of which could be used at a future date as part of the temple complex. The proposed structure would be 2 stories high with a floor dimension of 61 feet by 87 feet, which dimension is the same as revealed to the prophet Joseph Smith as the size of the complex buildings." And you can find those dimensions in the Joseph Smith papers. I can't remember where, because I'm not going to go over that in this video. But you do have this, maybe it says it here, excuse me, revised plan of the house of the Lord, circa 10 August to circa 4 September 1833. So the temples would have looked like the Kirtland Temple. Okay, that's what they were going to look like, and I presume that whenever the church decides to renovate the Independence Visitor Center, that they would probably renovate it to look like how it's supposed to look like the Kirtland Temple. Okay, so here it is, the temples of the New Jerusalem. They look like the Kirtland Temple. Now, what it looks like right now, let me pull it up again, is this. Now, it's interesting because you have this that we know is a future temple of one of the world headquarters of the church, one of 24 in New Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, around the same time that this was built, I mean, it was later, but roughly around the same time, you had the BYU Jerusalem Center, which was also built after the Independence Visitor Center. And it also features this unusual, or this very prominent arcade feature right here. It's very interesting. I was told that when you talk about these kind of arches, the shape of it, it's called a Roman arch, which is very fitting again. You'll remember that the church symbol features this shape, the Roman arch. Now, officially, this is supposed to symbolize the tomb, Christ, the resurrected Christ coming out of the tomb, but it's an arch, and you can see how there's that symbolism there. You have the Roman arch with the Independence Visitor Center. You have it with the BYU Jerusalem Center, which is pretty close to the Temple Mount. It's on the other side of the Kidron Valley. Let me show you. Oh, I got to turn on terrain. So there's the Mount of Olives over there, and it's part of the same ridge as the Mount of Olives, but technically it's on Mount Scopus, which is just north of the Mount of Olives. So you have this right here. And I believe that this could be renovated and turned into a temple. I do. Don't know that that's going to happen. The only agreement that we have is not to use it for proselyting, but there's nothing that says that it can't be changed at some future date. And of course, the Lord can do whatever he wants, but we're not going to break any rules or agreements with the Israeli government or anything like that. But anyway, so you have that, right? And then also in another capital city, in this case, the capital of Brazil, you have this recently dedicated temple in Brasilia, Brazil, which looks an awful lot like the BYU Jerusalem Center, like it was inspired by the BYU Jerusalem Center or something. you have like these tiers right here, 3 tiers, and it pretty well matches the BYU Jerusalem Center. So looking at these arches and whatever, we don't know what's going to happen with the BYU Jerusalem Center. It may not turn out to be a temple. This one will. I don't know if when they renovate it, they're going to make it look like the Kirtland Temple, or if they're going to keep the arches, the arcade. But with that in mind, when we look at the Dome of the Rock, it also has arcades, both inside and outside. So it's an interesting connection. Now, I know that arcades are popular, so maybe it's just, well, there's no connection, but maybe there is. I don't know. And guess what? You don't know either. We'll just have to wait and see. But it would be really good having those things match between these capital cities, New Jerusalem and Old Jerusalem. Okay, under the history section, Jerusalem was ruled by the Byzantine Empire through the 4th to 6th centuries. During this time, Christian pilgrimage to Jerusalem began to develop. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built under Constantine in the 320s, but the Temple Mount was left undeveloped after a failed project of restoration of the Jewish temple under Emperor Julian. In 638 AD, Byzantine Jerusalem was conquered by the Arab armies of Umar ibn al-Khattab, second caliph of the Rashidun Caliphate. Umar was advised by Ka'b al-Abar, a Jewish rabbi who converted to Islam, that the site is identical with the site of the former Jewish temples in Jerusalem. Among the first Muslims, Jerusalem was referred to as Madinat Bait al-Maqdis, or City of the Temple. So you have this Jewish rabbi that at least identified that location as the location of the temple. Who knows how many Jews were converted to Islam, either by force or willingly, in those early days. But it's interesting to think about that as the Jews building this temple, but as Muslims. That may not be right, but okay. The Dome of the Rock's architecture and mosaics were patterned after nearby Byzantine churches and palaces. The supervisor and engineer in charge of the project were Raja ibn Haywa, Yazid ibn Salam, and the latter's son Baha. Raja was a Muslim theologian and native of Basin, and Yazid and Baha were Mawali, non-Arab Muslim converts, clients of Abd al-Malik from Jerusalem. Abd al-Malik was represented in the supervision of the construction of his son. Okay, the Caliph employed expert works from across his domain, at the time restricted to Syria and Egypt, who were presumably Christians. Now that's interesting. So the people that actually, the workers, those who actually built it up, were presumably Christians, or at least, maybe most of them were. And again, there were many Jews at the time of Christ that recognized Christ as the Messiah, and they became Christians, right? According to the world, the way that the world looks at it. Basically, they were members of the church, and they recognized Christ when he came, and so they remained members of the church. But from the outside world, Jews that accepted Christ as the Messiah became Christians. So the people that built the Dome of the Rock, it seems like a lot of them, if not all of them, were Christians. And maybe some of them were previously Jew and not Gentile. I don't know. Construction costs were reportedly 7 times the yearly tax income of Egypt. The historian K.A.C. Creswell noted that those who built the shrine used the measurements of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So that's what it was patterned after. Let's see. I think I have that pulled up. Do I? Yeah, right here. Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is what the Dome of the Rock was patterned after a Christian church. And this particular church, it's very fitting why this church exists. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, also known as the Church of the Resurrection, is a 4th century church in the Christian quarter of the old city of Jerusalem. It is considered to be the holiest site for Christians in the world, as it has been the most important pilgrimage site for Christianity since the 4th century. According to traditions dating back to the 4th century, it contains 2 sites considered holy in Christianity. The site where Jesus was crucified at a place known as Calvary or Golgotha, and Jesus' empty tomb, which is where he was buried and resurrected. Before anyone types it, I realize that there's another location, and it seems to be a location that's favored by church leadership. I think it's just simply referred to as the Garden Tomb, and it's a place where presidents of the church and apostles have been photographed, coming out of the tomb from the garden tomb. So there's the scholarship and academics and everybody, they're not agreed as to whether the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was the location of his crucifixion and his tomb, or if it was this other area. I understand. I understand. But whatever the case, some people believe that this is the location, and that's what this church is supposed to symbolize. And it's built upon what some believe is that site. And so you have the Dome of the Rock that's patterned after a church that itself is supposed to be the site of the resurrection, right? That's interesting. We look at the Dome of the Rock patterned after a church that's supposed to be the site of the resurrection. So that makes it even more perfect, I think. Okay. The supervisor and engineer. Oh, wait, sorry, no. I went back. Okay. The diameter of the dome of the shrine is 20.20 meters, or 66.3 feet, and its height 20.48 meters, or 67.2 feet, where the diameter of the dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is 20.9, and its height is 21.5. So it's pretty close. The measurements are pretty close. In fact, they're very close. You have 20.20 right here and 20.990 here for the Dome of the Rock. For the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, 20.48 for the height. For the Dome of the Rock, 21.05. So they're very close in size. So that's interesting. And I'll skip over that. Okay. I think that's pretty much all I have to say about the Dome of the Rock. I'll close out of that. So when we look at the symbolism, when we look at who built it and what it was patterned after, and its similarity, at least as far as like the arcades go, to these other important church buildings, it's plausible. It's a really good symbol for Christ and his kingdom when he comes, and just everything. Now, the thing about it is that church leaders seem to indicate that this would not be possible. So we're going to read through what they have to say. But I would ask you to consider that maybe it's just simply the fact that the Lord's plan has not been fully revealed. There is an ongoing restoration. And maybe this is part of that. Maybe at some point, President Nelson will receive a revelation saying, okay, it's actually been here this whole time. There's still some work that needs to be done on it, but that is going to be the temple. I think that's a possibility, but let's look and see what others said. So first we have Joseph Smith. This is found in Scriptural Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, page 122. Joseph Smith said, Judah must return, which has happened. Jerusalem must be rebuilt, which has happened. And the temple, which that's up for debate. It seemed, now I don't know what Joseph Smith knew at the time. I'm sure he was probably aware that there was the Dome of the Rock, but I don't know for sure what he knew about Jerusalem at his time when he said this. But he says, and the temple, and water come out from under the temple, and the waters of the Dead Sea be healed. It will take some time to rebuild the walls of the city and the temple, etc. And all this must be done before the Son of Man will make his appearance. So, if he knew that there was the Dome of the Rock, then this would probably not be a possibility, unless he was just going off of what had been revealed up until that point. So it's unclear. Maybe he knew that the Dome of the Rock could not be the temple, and that's why he said the temple must be rebuilt, because he recognized that that was not the temple. Or maybe it was just incomplete knowledge. I don't know. We have Charles W. Penrose, who was a member of the First Presidency. This is in an article called The Second Advent in the Millennial Star, 1859. The Jews, still in unbelief that Jesus was the Christ, will separate themselves from among the Gentiles and gather to their fatherland. Events will be so controlled by the God of Israel, that they shall possess the land again and build the temple in its former place. They will increase and multiply in numbers and in riches and practice the rites of the Mosaic law, looking forward to the coming of Messiah to reign over them as king. Okay. So again, according to his view, the temple had not been built, and it needs to be built in its former place. There's also this right here. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this is from John Taylor. He was speaking to Baron Rothschild, who was a Jew, and they were talking about the Salt Lake Temple and about the future temple in Jerusalem. And I'm just going to read a part of this. Talking to Baron Rothschild, you will build a temple for the Lord, for the Lord has shown us, among other things, that you Jews have quite a role to perform in the latter days, and that all the things spoken by your old prophets will be fulfilled, that you will be gathered to old Jerusalem, and that you will build a temple there. And when you build that temple, and the time has arrived, the Lord whom ye seek will suddenly come to his temple. So, again, it seems that the way that that's said, that John Taylor believed that the temple had not been built yet, that the Jews need to go there, they need to build it. Okay. Now we have another one from Charles W. Penrose, member of the First Presidency. Here he's a little bit more specific about the Temple Mount and the site where the Dome of the Rock sits. He says, then the gospel, as I before remarked, will be preached to the Jews. The way is now being prepared for this. The work is moving on for the gathering of the Jews to their own land, that they may build it up as it was in former times, that the temple may be rebuilt, and the mosque of the Muslim, which now stands in its place, may be moved out of the way. So there he just explicitly says the Dome of the Rock has to go, and then the temples can be built. Just a couple more. We have this from James E. Talmage in a book called The House of the Lord, a study of holy sanctuaries, ancient and modern. He says, excuse me, as to whether, in the 25th year of the Babylonian captivity, while yet the people of Israel were in exile in a strange land, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Ezekiel. The power of God rested upon him, and he saw in vision a glorious temple, the plan of which he minutely described. As to whether the prophet himself considered the design so shown as one to be subsequently realized, or as but a grand yet unattainable ideal, is not declared. Certain it is that the temple of the vision has not yet been builded. So he's saying there that it's unclear whether Ezekiel's vision is something that's absolutely supposed to happen according to those specifications, or if maybe some of that's symbolic and it's conveying spiritual messaging. But either way, that temple of Ezekiel has not been built, because we don't have a temple right now according to those specifications. But that's another thing to take into account, is Ezekiel's vision of the third temple. And then lastly, this is from Bruce R. McConkie. in Millennial Messiah, pages 278 to 280. He says, "And thus ended the temple work in Jerusalem in the old temple with its Mosaic ordinances, in the temple whose work, like the law of Moses, of which it was a symbol, was fulfilled. And thus was it to be in Jerusalem until the prophesied day where a new temple should arise, perhaps on the very site of the old one, in which the gospel ordinances of the new kingdom shall be performed." So he leaves some doubt or some question as to whether it has to be built on the same site or not. He just says perhaps on the same site, but maybe not necessarily. And he goes on to talk about how it's going to be the church that builds the temple. So he says, "Who are those that are afar off, who shall come to Jerusalem to build the house of the Lord? Surely they are the Jews who have been scattered afar. But by what power and under whose authorization shall the work be done? There is only one place under the whole heavens where the keys of temple building are found. There's only one people who know how to build temples and what to do in them when they are completed. That people is the Latter-day Saints. The temple in Jerusalem will not be built by Jews who have assembled there for political purposes as at present." So now, taking that into account, like I said, it could be maybe the BYU Jerusalem Center will initially be the first temple of maybe a Jerusalem temple complex. Maybe there's going to be multiple temples in Jerusalem, and this will be the first one. So if that's the case, it has been built. It's been built by Jews and Arabs as well, and under the direction of the president of the church through BYU. And President Jeffrey R. Holland was the president of BYU at the time that this happened. So, and he's made interesting statements about this, by the way. And I've covered that before. I'll cover it again, just not right now. So who knows? Maybe this will be the temple. Maybe later on, this will stay the same, but it'll be renovated. And it'll be renovated under the direction of the church. It'll be made into a building that can be used for ordinances or whatever this temple is supposed to be used for. I say that because these temples that are, no, not this one. We learn in the Joseph Smith papers that all these 24 temples have different purposes. They're not all necessarily temples like the temples that we have right now. Some would be for education. Some would be administration buildings, and so maybe the same thing would happen in Jerusalem. So the point is there's lots of different things to think about. And I don't think that we should get too rigid as to how it has to happen, because you and I may not know. Maybe this will be it. Maybe it'll be the BYU Jerusalem Center, and then later at the second coming, this will be renovated into a temple, and this is how it's supposed to go. Or maybe Ezekiel's temple will be constructed. Maybe the Jews will be successful at building the third temple. Maybe there'll be like a big war, and they'll relocate or demolish the Dome of the Rock and then build their temple there. There's just like so many different things that could happen. So I think it's okay to consider these different possibilities and just wait and see what actually happens. But again, I would just remind you what we read at the beginning of the video, that a lot of times prophecy is fulfilled in natural ways, in ways that you may not expect and may fail to realize unless you have the Spirit. And maybe we're looking at one of those right here. And maybe we're looking at one of those right here as well. All right, well, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.